Everyone laughed when he bought the wreck no one wanted, a rotting boat left to die at the edge of the harbor. They called him foolish, broken, and lost. But what he uncovered inside that forgotten vessel would not only silence the town, it would rewrite its history and awaken a legacy buried for decades. This is the story of a man who dared to believe when no one else did. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. In the quiet town of Driftmore, where the sea whispered secrets and the wind carried stories from long ago, lived a man named Leonard Bray. Once known for his skilled hands and calm nature, Leonard had become a forgotten figure. Years ago, he ran a small workshop near the docks, crafting fishing boats and repairing nets for the townsfolk. His work was honest, and his reputation was solid. But when the economy turned and orders stopped coming, his business collapsed. The workshop closed, and Leonard faded into the background. He had no family left in Driftmore. His wife had left during the hardest years, and his children had moved far away, chasing lives untouched by the town's slow decline. Now, Leonard walked alone through the narrow streets, his boots worn, his coat faded, and his eyes heavy with silence. The people of Driftmore no longer greeted him. They whispered instead, calling him unlucky, calling him foolish. He had become a symbol of failure, a man who once had promise but lost everything. On a chilly morning in late spring, the town gathered at the harbor for the annual auction. It was a tradition where old equipment, forgotten tools, and abandoned boats were sold to anyone willing to take them. The air smelled of salt and rust. Gulls circled overhead, and the crowd buzzed with quiet judgment. Among the rusted anchors and broken engines stood a boat that looked more like a ghost than a vessel. Its wood was cracked, its paint peeled, and weeds had grown through its seams. No one paid it much attention. It was clearly beyond repair. But Leonard saw something different. He stood at the edge of the crowd, hands deep in his pockets, staring at the wreck. There was a pull in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. The boat was broken, yes, but it spoke to him, not with words, but with memory. It reminded him of the boats he used to build, the quiet pride he once felt. It reminded him of purpose. When the auctioneer called for bids, no one raised a hand. The crowd chuckled, waiting for the wreck to be passed over. Then Leonard stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but firm. He placed a bid. Laughter erupted. People turned to look. Some shook their heads. Others made cruel jokes. "He's finally lost it," someone said. "Maybe he'll live in it," another added. The auctioneer hesitated, then slammed the gavel. Sold. Leonard walked toward the boat, ignoring the stares. He placed his hand on the hull, feeling the rough wood beneath his fingers. The laughter behind him faded into the wind. He didn't look back. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, alone with the wreck that no one wanted. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leonard remained by the boat. The harbor was quiet now. The crowd had gone home. The town's gossip had moved on. But Leonard stayed. He studied the vessel, tracing its lines, imagining what it once looked like. He saw past the damage. He saw the structure beneath. He saw the possibility. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no money, no tools, and no help. The town wouldn't support him. They would rather watch him fail than see him succeed. But for the first time in years, Leonard felt something stronger than doubt. He felt determination. He sat on an old crate beside the boat, listening to the creak of the dock and the soft splash of water against the pilings. The stars began to appear above, and the boat stood dark against the fading light. It was a wreck, yes, but it was his wreck, and he would restore it. The story of Leonard Bray was just beginning. The man they had forgotten, the man they had mocked, had found something worth fighting for. And though the town didn't know it yet, the wreck they laughed at would soon become the center of a story that would change everything. This was not just a tale of a broken boat. It was a story of resilience, of quiet strength, and of a man who refused to let failure define him. In Driftmore, where judgment came quickly and sympathy was rare, Leonard Bray had chosen to believe in something again. And that belief would carry him further than anyone could imagine. The days after the auction passed slowly in Driftmore. The town had moved on, but Leonard Bray had not. Each morning, he returned to the broken boat, his hands covered in dust and salt, his mind focused on the task ahead. The wreck sat quietly at the edge of the harbor, ignored by most. But to Leonard, it had become a symbol of something more. It was not just a project. It was a chance to rebuild what had been lost. He worked alone at first, using scraps of wood and rusted tools he had collected over the years. The boat was in terrible shape. Its frame was weak, its deck warped, and its insides filled with rot. But Leonard didn't give up. He cleaned, he patched, and he carved. He didn't speak much, but his actions spoke louder than words. The townspeople watched from a distance, still unsure whether to laugh or to wonder. One afternoon, a girl named Ivy wandered down to the dock. She was 16, curious and full of questions. She had seen Leonard from her window and wanted to know why he was spending so much time with a boat that looked beyond saving. She stood quietly for a moment before asking, "Why this one?" Leonard looked up, surprised by her presence. He paused, then said, "Because it still has something to give." Ivy didn't understand at first, but she kept coming back. She watched him work, sometimes handing him tools, sometimes just sitting nearby. She asked about boats, about wood, about the sea. Leonard answered in short sentences, but slowly, a quiet friendship began to form. Ivy didn't judge him. She didn't laugh. She listened. As the days grew warmer, another visitor appeared. Norin, a retired sailor who had once worked with Leonard's father, came to see the boat. He was old now, his back bent and his voice rough. He leaned on a cane and stared at the vessel for a long time. Then he said, "This boat has history. It's not just a wreck. It belonged to someone who mattered." Leonard was surprised. He had never heard that before. Norin explained that the boat had once been part of a rescue mission many years ago. It had carried supplies during a storm that nearly destroyed the town. It had saved lives, but after the mission, it was forgotten, left to rot at the edge of the harbor. Norin believed it had been waiting for someone to remember. The story spread quietly. Ivy told her friends. Norin shared it at the local tavern. People began to look at the boat differently. It was no longer just a pile of wood. It was a piece of Driftmore's past, and Leonard was bringing it back. As Leonard worked, he discovered strange markings inside the hull. They were carved deep into the wood, hidden beneath layers of decay. Ivy helped him clean the area, revealing symbols and initials. Norin recognized them. They were signs used by sailors to mark safe passage and hidden compartments. It was clear the boat had secrets. They found a small chamber beneath the deck, sealed with rusted nails. Inside were old maps, faded letters, and a journal wrapped in cloth. The pages were fragile, but the words were clear. They spoke of storms, of survival, and of a crew that had risked everything to protect the town. The journal belonged to Leonard's father. The discovery changed everything. Leonard had not known the full story. He had grown up hearing bits and pieces, but the journal filled in the gaps. His father had been brave, part of something bigger than himself, and now Leonard was continuing that legacy. The boat was no longer just a project. It was a connection to the past, a bridge between generations. Ivy recorded the restoration with her phone, sharing clips online. People began to comment, asking questions, offering support. The story was spreading beyond Driftmore, but not everyone was convinced. Some still doubted Leonard's efforts. They said the boat would never sail again. They said it was a waste of time. Leonard didn't argue. He kept working. He knew what the boat meant. He knew what it could become. As the sun set each evening, the boat stood taller, stronger. Its shape was returning, its spirit awakening. Leonard, Ivy, and Norin continued their quiet work, driven by memory and hope. The whispers of the past had become a voice, guiding them forward. This was no longer just a story of a man and a wreck. It was a story of rediscovery, of forgotten courage, and of a town slowly remembering what mattered. And as the boat neared completion, the promise of what lay ahead grew stronger. The journey was far from over. The wind began to shift over Driftmoor, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of a storm. The sky darkened slowly, clouds rolling in from the sea like waves of shadow. Fishermen pulled their boats ashore, shopkeepers locked their doors, and families gathered inside. The town had seen storms before, but this one felt different. It was stronger, louder, and more unpredictable. Leonard Bray stood by the boat, now half restored, watching the sky with quiet concern. The vessel had come a long way since the auction. Its hull had been reinforced, its deck repaired, and its shape was beginning to resemble the proud structure it once was. But it was still fragile. The storm could undo everything. Ivy arrived just before the first drops of rain fell. She had brought a tarp and some rope, hoping to help protect the boat. Norin followed, slower but determined, carrying a lantern and a bundle of old blankets. Together, the three of them worked quickly, tying down loose boards and covering exposed areas. The wind howled around them, and the rain began to fall in heavy sheets. As the storm grew stronger, Leonard refused to leave. He stayed by the boat, shielding it with his own body when the wind threatened to tear the tarp away. Ivy and Norin shouted for him to come inside, but he shook his head. He couldn't abandon it. Not now. Not after everything. The storm lasted through the night. Lightning lit up the harbor, and thunder echoed through the hills. Waves crashed against the dock, and the boat groaned under the pressure. But it held. When morning came, the sky cleared slowly, revealing a town soaked and shaken, but still standing. Leonard was exhausted. His clothes were soaked, his hands bruised, but he was still there. Ivy brought him warm tea, and Norin helped him sit down. They looked at the boat together. It had survived. And in the aftermath, something unexpected had happened. The storm had loosened part of the deck, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the boards. Leonard noticed it first, a small gap where the wood had shifted. He knelt down and began to clear away the debris. Ivy joined him, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. Norin watched silently, sensing something important was about to be found. Inside the compartment was a metal box, rusted but intact. Leonard opened it carefully. Inside were old papers, maps, and a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed, but the writing was clear. It was the logbook of a rescue mission, dated decades earlier. The boat had once carried supplies to a nearby village during a flood, saving lives and delivering hope when no one else could. The journal also contained letters written by Leonard's father, describing the mission, the risks, and the pride he felt in the boat. He had hidden the documents to protect them from damage, hoping one day they would be found. Leonard read the words slowly, his voice quiet and steady. Ivy listened closely, and Norin nodded with recognition. The revelation spread quickly. Mairead, a local historian, came to see the journal. She confirmed the story, matching the dates and names with old records. The boat had been part of a forgotten chapter in Driftmoor's history. It had been a symbol of courage and community, lost to time and neglect. The town began to change. People who had mocked Leonard now came to see the boat with new eyes. They asked questions, offered help, and shared memories. Ivy posted the story online, and it gained attention beyond Driftmoor. Messages poured in from other towns, praising Leonard's dedication and the boat's legacy. But Leonard didn't seek praise. He continued working, focused on finishing the restoration. The storm had tested him, but it had also revealed something deeper. The boat was more than wood and nails. It was a connection to his father, to the town, and to a part of himself he thought was lost. As the sun set over Driftmoor, the boat stood tall, its shape strong and its story known. Leonard, Ivy, Norin, and Mairead sat nearby, sharing quiet conversation and watching the light fade. The storm had passed, but its impact remained. This was not just a tale of survival. It was a story of discovery, of truth hidden beneath years of silence, and of a man who found strength in the face of doubt. The boat had revealed its past, and in doing so, had given Leonard a future. The journey was nearing its final chapter, but the message was clear. Even in the darkest storm, there is always something worth saving. The morning sun rose gently over Driftmoor, casting a golden light across the harbor. The town was quiet, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. People gathered near the docks, whispering and pointing toward the boat that had once been a wreck. Now, it stood tall and proud, fully restored, its polished wood gleaming, and its sails ready to catch the wind. Leonard Bray stood beside it, calm and focused, preparing for the voyage that would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It had taken months of hard work, patience, and belief. Leonard had rebuilt the boat, piece by piece, guided by memory, determination, and the support of a few who had dared to believe in him. Ivy had documented the journey, sharing videos and updates online. Norin had offered wisdom and stories from the past. Mairead had helped uncover the boat's history, connecting it to a legacy that Driftmoor had nearly forgotten. Now, the boat was ready to sail again. Leonard climbed aboard, his movements steady and sure. He checked the ropes, adjusted the sails, and looked out at the open water. The crowd watched in silence. Some had doubted him. Some had mocked him. But today, they stood together, waiting to see what would happen next. As the boat drifted away from the dock, the wind caught the sails, and it began to move with grace and strength. Leonard guided it through the harbor, past the familiar landmarks of his childhood, past the workshop that had once been his, and out toward the horizon. The water was calm, the sky clear, and the boat sailed smoothly, as if it had never been broken. Inside the cabin, Leonard had placed the journal and letters from his father. They were safe now, preserved and honored. The boat was more than a vessel. It was a tribute to courage, to history, and to the quiet strength that had carried him through the hardest times. Ivy stood at the edge of the dock, filming the moment. Her voice was steady as she spoke to the camera, sharing the story with viewers around the world. She talked about Leonard's journey, the restoration, the storm, and the discovery. She spoke of resilience, of hope, and of the power of believing in something when no one else does. The video went viral within days. People from different countries commented, sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery. They praised Leonard's determination and the beauty of the boat. They saw in his journey a reflection of their own challenges, and they found inspiration in his quiet triumph. Driftmoor changed too. The town began to honor the boat's legacy. A plaque was placed near the dock, telling the story of the rescue mission and the role the vessel had played. Children learned about it in school. Visitors came to see the harbor and hear the tale. Leonard's name was no longer spoken with pity. It was spoken with respect. But Leonard didn't seek attention. He continued to sail, sometimes alone, sometimes with Ivy or Norin. He explored the coastline, visited nearby villages, and shared the story wherever he went. He didn't speak much, but his presence carried meaning. He had become a symbol of quiet strength, of rebuilding, and of remembering. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Leonard sailed back into Driftmoor. The boat moved slowly, its sails catching the last light of day. People gathered once more, watching in silence. Leonard stepped onto the dock, nodded to the crowd, and walked toward the edge of town. He didn't need applause. He didn't need praise. He had found peace in the journey, in the restoration, and in the truth that had been uncovered. The boat had changed everything, not just for him, but for the town and for those who had followed the story from afar. This was not just the end of a project. It was the beginning of something lasting. A reminder that even the most broken things can be made whole again. A message that strength often comes quietly, through persistence and belief. And a story that would continue to inspire long after the sails had been lowered and the harbor had grown still. The voyage had changed everything. And Leonard Bray, once forgotten, had become the heart of a story that would never be lost again. And so, from the wreck no one wanted to the voyage that inspired thousands, Leonard Bray's journey reminds us all, sometimes the most broken things carry the strongest stories. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that move the heart and stir the soul.